Welcome again to the book of Exodus. We're going back and we're looking from the Hebrew at some very important points, and we're looking at the background of the land of Israel, and or not the land, but the people of Israel when they were in Egypt. And I wanted to go to the book of Jasher, and I want to read some things to you now that were taking place at this period of time. The book of Jasher is a history book. It's not inspired, so to speak, even though it's quoted in the Bible at least 3 times. And it is a, remember I told you last time that Levi was not part of the workforce. They were metallurgists, they were goldsmiths and silversmiths. They're going to build the city of Ramses here, and we'll go back to chapter 65. And it came to pass after these things that all the counselors of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and all the elders of Egypt assembled and came before the king and bowed down to the ground. This is background of what's going to happen here, okay? And they sat before him, and the counselors and elders of Egypt spoke unto the king, saying, Behold, the people of the children of Israel is greater and mightier than we are. And you know that all the evil which they did to us in the road when we returned from battle. And you have also seen their strong power. For this power is unto them from their fathers. Remember I told you that Jacob, Joseph, all of these people had supernatural strength. Remember that? Now, it's talking about this supernatural strength. Earlier, we quoted in the book of Genesis, we quoted when they went in and fought with 100,000 Canaanites. And even Jacob, as old as he was, drew a bow that could shoot further than any Canaanite, even when he was as old as he was. He was a great warrior. These people had supernatural strength, and that's what it's talking about here. But for a few men stood up against the people numerous as sand, and smote them with the edge of the sword. A few of them did, and they killed them all. These were powerful men, so they're afraid of them. They're afraid of their legends. You talk about Billy the Kid. You talk about Wyatt Earp. You talk about Jesse James and all of those. I can tell you stories about these people that really happened. Much of that they say that Clark County, Nevada is named after William Clark. But William Clark, many experts say, was Jesse James. Now, did you ever hear that before? That is an absolute, that is a lot of history from the family. Jesse James lived until, they say, when he was at 1938. He was not killed. They killed his cousin, because his cousin was impersonating Jesse James, and they wanted to go into to get out of the way because they were having enough time living in this country. They wanted to go and start another colony down in Cuba or South America or someplace, because the United States government after the Civil War would not leave them be. And here, Jesse James' cousin, which looks like Jesse James also, is doing all these robberies and saying that he's Jesse James. So they go to his house and tell him, cease and desist. He said, no way. Jesse James pulls his Colt Navy out and shoots him in the back of his head and kills him. They take a chicken, they take him now, and they take a chicken and they take it in the house and put all the blood all over the floor and everything and do this setup. And they have the Ford boys say that they shot him, but the only problem is the Ford boys were carrying a .44 caliber. Jesse James shoots him with a .36 caliber. Nothing worked. They covered all of this up, and Jesse James lived for many years later. They say that he even helped support Ford when he started his Ford Motor Company. Now these are just stories and legends, and then Jesse James, the reason why they couldn't catch them at all is because they went from one Baptist church to the other. His father had founded 5 Baptist churches, missionary Baptist churches. This is discover the word Missionary Baptist Church. Here. His father founded 5 Missionary Baptist Church, and they would go from church to church. Benjamin Marcus Bogart, which the story is over there in 3 volumes. In one volume it tells Jesse James and Frank James came to their house, and Benjamin Bogart's father was a Baptist deacon, and they stayed all night, and Jesse James slept in the bed with a little Ben, because they had to share beds back then. And he slept with that big pistol on his belly, and Ben Bogart wanted to grow up and be a Robin Hood like Jesse James, and he began to shoot and all of this stuff, and his father took him to a hangar. And he saw the man hang, and he decided he didn't want to be an outlaw. Jesse James and Frank James went from farm to farm. The banks were taking over their lands, and they took their money from these robberies and gave it to them, and they paid their farms off, and the railroads hated them because the railroads were taking over in the banks. The railroads and the banks, they were robbing. By the way, Jesse James never rode with the Youngers. Cole Younger and them, they rode with them only in the Civil War. Where they have them robbing those 2 banks across the street from each other and all of that, and all these people shooting up and everything. Jesse James and his brother were not there at all. It was the Daltons and the Youngers. And the bank that they were robbing right there was a man that killed their father. Cole Younger's father, and the money that they had in the bank they stole from their family. They had 7 farms in the South, the Youngers did, and they went from farm to farm to farm to farm. And their father was a postmaster, basically, and they had stagecoaches and trail, and they went from all these 7 farms, and they kept going and killing and killing and killing and killing, and the Youngers and the Daltons and the Jameses were relatives. Stories of legends. You hear all the legends of Billy the Kid and all this, and all how fast they were and all this stuff. These boys had legends about them. They were legendary, and they were afraid of them. And they were afraid that some of their descendants were be as good as them. Marilyn, when I got married, we got married, I went up in the mountains up there, and I threw, how many pennies did I throw in the air before I ever missed
21.
one? 21 pennies before I ever missed a penny.
Mm-hmm.
I hit 21 pennies in a row in the air shooting it. My great-great-grandfather was the greatest shot in Indian Territory, and that was Samuel Eichert Paul. It did rub off on me just a little bit, I guess. But my grandfather taught me how to shoot before I was a year old. I grew up shooting. These are legends now, and if they had been maneuvers, they would have utterly destroyed all of them. Everybody. One man stands up and wipes out 1,000 men. They remembered this story. This is Jesse James, the time's old. This is Frank James. This is Cole Younger. This is Wyatt Earp. Bat Mastersons of the day. Now therefore give us counsel what we may do with them, and we gradually destroy them from amongst us, lest they become so numerous for us in this land. For if the children of Israel should increase in the land, they will become an obstacle to us. And if any war should happen to take place, they will, their great strength, will join our enemy against us and fight against us and destroy us from the land and go away from it. We're going to lose our labor force. They're going to destroy us, and then they're going to walk off, and we're going to lose our labor force. And so the king answered the elders of Egypt and said unto them, this is the plan advised against Israel from which we will not depart. Now it tells you very little about it in the Bible, does it? But it tells you the rest of the story here. They were the legends of the time. They were the Billy Kids, the Bat Masters, and the Wyatt Earps, the Jesse James of their time. They were unstoppable. Wyatt Earp was in I don't know how many gunfights in his life, and he never had a bullet hit him. He escaped all those bullets. I mean the gunfight at the OK Trail and many, many, many others. Bat Masterson, they called him the Man of Steel. He ended up being a New York reporter writing and died at his desk in 1920-something. The Man of Steel. By the way, I got a lot of their books written by them. These are legends now, so we're afraid of the legends. And behold, in the land of Pithon and Ramses and cities unfortified against battle, it behooves you and us to build them and to fortify them. Let's build up these cities and fortify these cities. We're going to see these cities later on. Now, go and also act cunningly, deceitfully toward them, and proclaim a voice in Egypt and in Goshen at the command of the king, saying, now what does the word Pharaoh mean? The man in the big house. Pharaoh means the man in the big house. And all ye men of Egypt, Goshen, Pathros, and all their inhabitants, the king has commanded to us to build Pithon and Ramses, and to fortify them for the battle, who amongst you of all Egypt and the children of Israel, and of all the inhabitants of cities are willing to build with us, shall each have his wages given to him daily at the king's order. So you go first and do cunningly, and gather yourselves and come to Pythes and Ramses to build a city. Now go down there and tell them we're going to hire you. Then when you get them up here, you put them in there, you don't pay them. You only give them enough food to live on, just to stay alive. You offer them big wages. That's kind of like communism, isn't it? Some of these people that are so for communism in America today, which we are having a problem with, it's not socialism we're having trouble with, it's communism. Let them go live in a communist country. Let AOC go over there and live in a communist country. Let them go there for a little while and let them get a taste of it. They think that, you know, everybody shares everything. Nobody owns anything. The upper echelon owns it all. You go in America today, the guys are propagating this are extremely billionaire wealthy. The Biden crime family. The Bush crime family. The Bush crime family have been working in the backgrounds with Biden and Obama and all this all the time. Trump came in there, an outsider. There was not a politician, and he comes in there and he thinks America needs to be great again. We need to bring all this stuff back. And Obama says, no, that's a miracle. You can't bring the jobs back to America. He'd been sending them overseas. They were all in what we call figuratively in bed with China. And they were sending all our jobs overseas. They were having them do all of our manufacturing. And they were never going to bring it back, the steel industry, everything else. We're going to make all this country green by doing away with the jobs. And who's going to be the workers? Who's going to support all this mess? These guys down there in East LA, down there with their own gangsters that came up here out of El Salvador and stuff, are they going to support anything? What they're doing is robbing. The police department doesn't even go to the police calls half the time. And if they go pick somebody up, the DA is going to turn them loose out on the street again. People can't even... you can't even drive down the road safely down in those countries. Those people that are outlaws that are running and outrunning the cops. You can go on YouTube and you can just watch these races, these chases all over the place down there. And they come up here sometimes and they run down Highway 395 and they get stopped. Because we have a highway patrol department up here that sometimes works. They drive 120 miles an hour because they're used to doing that because nobody can stop them because all of them are doing it. Outlawry. You go into communist countries, you don't have that problem. You don't have that problem at all. Now here we're going to come into a country here, and they're going to change all of the whole social, economical system. Joseph went down there and made Pharaoh the richest man in the world, and they owned all the land, etc., etc. Now the tables are going to be turned upon his children. But God will permit it. It's not God's direct will. It's God's permissive will. You know, when somebody gets killed in a hospital from neglect or anything, it's not God's will. Who's the God of this world?
The devil.
The devil. The devil does a lot of things. Every bit of death, every bit of malpractice, every bit of malfeasance, everything that you do, it happens in the world today. It is not God's will. It is God's permissive will. He allows it to happen. It's not His will. When the man died up here for lack of help finding him on purpose, that happened on purpose. It wasn't God's will that the man died up there starving to death and dying of thirst up here in these mountains. It was negligence. Negligence, negligence, negligence. And while you see building calls a proclamation of this kind to make throughout Egypt every day at the command of the king, and when some of the children of Israel shall come to build with you, you shall give them their wages daily for a few days. Make them think this is okay. And after they shall have built for you their daily hire, drag yourselves away from them daily, one by one, in secret, and then you shall rise up and become their taskmasters and officers. This is the story behind the story now. This is what happened. The story behind the story. If this becomes a communist society, they will put away all outlawry. And these people that are propagating it will now then become outlaws because we can't afford that type of society. This is an ironclad society. How many people did Stalin kill? How about Mao Tse? Taskmasters and officers, you shall lead them afterward and build without wages. Build without wages. And you should, they refuse, then force them with all your might to build. This is what really happened. This is behind the scenes now. The Bible says they went under slavery, but this is how they went under slavery. They had a false political leader. Everything's going to be fine. Just trust me. Just trust me. And if you do this, it will be well with us to strengthen our land against the children of Israel, for on account of the fatigue of the building and the work, the children of Israel they will decrease. They'll become so weak, they don't propagate so much. They'll be too tired to have extra recreational activities at night. Because you will deprive them from their wages day by day. And all the elders of Egypt had heard the counsel of the king, and the counsel seemed good in their eyes, and in the eyes of the servants of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all Egypt, and they did according to the word of the king. Pharaoh and all the servants went away from the king, and they caused a proclamation to be made in all Egypt, and Taphagnatches and Goshen, and in all the cities surrounding Egypt, saying, you have seen what the children of Esau, Ishmael, did to us, who came to war against us and wished to destroy us. Now therefore the king commanded us to fortify the land, to build the cities of Pithon and Ramses, and to fortify them for battle, if they should again come against us. Whosoever of you from all of Egypt and from all the children of Israel will come to build with us, he shall have his daily wages, and given by the king as his command is unto us. And when Egypt and all the children of Israel heard all the servants of Pharaoh had spoken, they came from the Egyptians and the children of Israel to build with the servants of Pharaoh and Pithon and Ramses, but none of the children of Levi came. Remember what I told you about Levi? This is the priestly family now. These are the goldsmiths and the silversmiths, and they're the ones that doing all these decorative tombs and stuff back down there with their brethren to build. And all the servants of Pharaoh and his princes came at first with deceit to build with all Israel as daily bread, or daily hired laborers, and they gave to Israel their daily hire in the beginning. Promises, promises, promises. We have had a lot of presidents in America, very few of them ever kept their promises. Teddy Roosevelt did, Franklin Roosevelt. We had a few like that. Donald Trump. He kept his promises. He did everything he could under tremendous stress, didn't he? Under tremendous stress, he did what he could do. And he turned America around. And they came behind him from within to begin with. All started with the coronavirus, the China plague that really, I think, many people think was actually a manufactured biochemical warfare. Because they broke the world with that biochemical warfare. Even Trump's own cabinet members stood against him. Terrible, terrible. Some of the advisors told them, let's stop the travel from China, everything. And Fauci stood up and said, oh, there's no problem, no problem, no problem, no problem, no problem. Biden in the background, all of these people in the background, they're in business with China. And there's, oh, no, 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 no. Fauci was the one, no, 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 this is no worse than the flu or anything else. And some of the advisors, few of the advisors said, let's stop all travel trade, let's develop vaccines, let's do all this kind of stuff. Well, they had to get swabs it was a great deal to get materials because Trump tried to stop all of the scalping of individuals with the water. Sometimes water was $10 a gallon down in Las Vegas. You couldn't buy toilet paper on the shelf. You couldn't get cotton swabs. You couldn't get alcohol. You couldn't get Purex. All this stuff. They were trying to stop this, and the other side was no, no, no. Manufactured destruction in our own backyard by the people that were cutting his throat. Deceit. Deceit. So they decided to develop a vaccine, and he said, do it, give them billions of dollars, get this going, get 3 or 4 different companies going, get them going. They found out they started therapeutics, and they started pushing millions of dollars behind these therapeutics, and they found other ivermectin, they found other different things that they could use that would be less expensive, and of course they were fighting that. Because ever since Mr. Bush, the drug companies become very powerful and the medical industry in America. And Fauci kept going false alarms, going to the big 5, fake news, and telling the world all of this stuff, nothing. And then they started lying about Trump and said, you know, he wasn't doing all this stuff. Well, he was trying to do it with his good advisors, but he had a whole lot of bad advisors. He kept firing. You know, he should have fired the whole FBI and the CIA. He should have started all over. Now you look back and that's what should have been done. And expose the fake news, etc. Here we have the fake news going back here, don't we? Don't we? Yeah. Got the fake news going here? Is this the first time the fake news ever took over? No. It happened in the land of Egypt before Christ. And the servants of Pharaoh built with all of Israel and were employed in the work with Israel for a month. And at the end of the month, all the servants of Pharaoh began to withdraw secretly from the people of Israel daily. They started little, and then they began living in shacks and shanty towns, so to speak. You remember, they were the upper echelon of Egypt. They were the most powerful warriors in Egypt, and now they're going to be slaves. How did they become slaves? They were lied to. By the politicians of the day. That's how they became slaves. They were lied to by the politicians and the fake news of the day. And Israel went on with the work at that time, but then they received their daily hire because some of the men of Egypt were yet carrying on the work and with Israel at that time, and therefore the Egyptians gave Israel their hire in those days in order that the Egyptians and their fellow workmen might also take the pay for their labor. And at the end of the year, in 4 months, and all the Egyptians had withdrawn from the children of Israel, so the children of Israel were left alone, engaged in slave labor, with no wages. With no wages. You know, the Chinese people follow orders genetically. Did you know that? Because the Chinese people have been slaves for thousands of years. Thousands of years, they just are slaves. That's what they do. These people were not slaves in the original, now they become slaves. How did the Chinese people become slaves for so many thousands of years? They built gigantic structures in China. The Chinese people, the Hittites, basically, the Hittites mean the terrible ones, the ones that fearful ones. They were the ones that invented metallurgy, gunpowder later on. They built cast iron works and bronze works. They had piped gas, natural gas into homes and stoves before anybody flushed toilets. All this behind that Hittite culture of old. But they made slaves out of people. You have the ruling class and you have the slaves. Did you know when Mao was in power in China? This is political science and everything else, isn't it? When Mao was in power in China, he told the people, we have to quit cooking Chinese food. Yeah, this is real. This really happened now. This happened. This is not a story. This isn't a fabricated tale. They said, quit allowing them to cook the beef and the pork and everything. You have rice. You have rice. You have rice like Mayo has rice. You have a cup of rice, and that's what you eat. You eat rice with a little broth, a little fish. You know that when Mayo died, that they didn't have any Chinese chefs in China at all. They had to import them from someplace else, from America or someplace else. They had all left the country because of the Depression and because of the totalitarian rule. They had left the country. They had to import them back so they could learn how to cook their own food that they've been famous for thousands of years. Isn't that a story? What a joke. You think that could happen today? Yes, it can happen today. They're telling you now on television not to eat meat. You need to eat vegetables. You need to eat green. You need to stop. Cows take so much food to raise a cow. It's a horrible thing, immoral thing to have a cow, to kill a cow, or a goat, or a sheep. If the green people were totally in power, you would have no meat markets at all. You'd have nothing but vegans and vegetarians. You know, a vegan's different than a vegetarian. You know that, don't you? A vegan won't eat any milk, cheese, or anything. A vegetarian will eat cheese, things like that, and milk. Now, isn't this what's going on? Don't you see advertisements on television? Don't do this. Stop eating meats. And even that they'll tell you what kind of nuts you can eat and what kind of things you can eat for different. Don't eat this meat because they have bad wages in this country when they're processing these nuts. It's bad for you because you're propagating these bad people. What makes a liberal so liberal? What makes a liberal think that he can lie and cheat and steal and pervert justice? Because they think they're morally right. No matter what they do is okay. No matter what they do is okay. So no matter what these people did, it's okay because the end result is what they're going for. It doesn't matter what they do to somebody else. It doesn't matter how they get there, how they get in power. It's just to stay in power. And that's what we see in America today in Washington, D.C. By deceit. They got there. After all the Egyptians were drawn from the children of Israel, they retired and became oppressors and officers over them, and some of them stood over the children of Israel as taskmasters to receive from them all that they gave them for pay. In other words, the taskmasters now are getting all the money. Getting all the money. Taskmasters getting all the money. Promises, empty promises, lies. You can go and you can equate this to America today in the Biden family alone. If you just took them, you take the Bush family too. All the things that they did, all the backdoor deals and the pharmaceuticals and the doctors and foreign oil and all of that. Covered for 9/11. Bush covered for 9/11. The real people of 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. He covered for them. He said, what are we going to do? 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 He met with the imams. What are we going to do? How can we lie about this? How can I go start a war with somebody else? Because wartime economy is real good, you know. It keeps the deep state going and the military complex just rolling. What are we doing right now? They thought Trump was going to get us into World War III. He wanted to get us out of all conflict. That's contrary to the work ethics of a country. You don't go start a war with somebody to build up your complexes or anything. You stabilize the world. And he stabilized it too. They were afraid of it. He said what he was going to do, and they believed it. Biden says, Russia knows me, Russia knows me, they're afraid of me, Russia knows me, Russia knows me, Russia knows me. Well, they took millions of dollars from Russia and China. Hunter Biden is the bagman for the whole family. Frank Biden is down in South America hiding from killing a man near San Diego, making millions of dollars there for the whole Biden family. James Biden, Hunter Biden, all of them, all bagmen from all over the world. Millions of dollars are flowing in, millions of dollars are flowing in, and you're paying for it. Because the American worker is being destroyed. American commerce, American industry is being destroyed. Same story back here. Same story. And the Egyptians did this in a manner to the children of Israel day by day in order to afflict them in their work. And all the children of Israel were alone engaged in the labor, and the Egyptians refrained from giving any pay to the children of Israel from that time forward. Wait till these people that they've tried to get in here, they have to go to work. It's going to be a shock for somebody to go to work. What's going to happen when America is totally broke with all this giveaway stuff and all of the things that's happened? Somebody's got to pay for it, huh? And when some of the men of Israel refused to work on account of the wages not being given to them, then the extractors and the servants of Pharaoh oppressed them and smote them with heavy blows, and made them return by force to labor with their brethren, and thus all the Egyptians unto the children of Israel all the day. And all the children of Israel were greatly afraid of the Egyptians in this manner, and all the children of Israel returned and worked alone without pay. And the children of Israel built Python and Ramses, and all the children of Israel did the work of making bricks and some building. And the children of Israel built and fortified all the land of Egypt with all its walls, and the children of Israel were engaged in work for many years, until the time came when the Lord remembered them and brought them out of Egypt. But the children of Levi were not employed in the work with their brethren of Israel from the beginning unto the day of their going forth from Egypt. This is the priestly tribe. For all the children of Levi knew that the Egyptians had spoken all these words with deceit. It reminds them of the Republican Party, doesn't it? these Levites had to be Republicans. Therefore the children of Levi refrained from approaching to the work with their brethren. And the Egyptians did not direct their attention to make the children of Levi work afterwards, since they had not been with their brethren in the beginning before the Egyptians left them alone. And the hands of the men of Egypt were directed with continued severity against the children of Israel in that work, and the Egyptians made the children of Israel work with rigor, with great sweat and pain. And the Egyptians embittered the lives of the children of Israel with hard work in mortar and bricks, and also in the manner of work in the field. And the children of Israel called Melel, the king of Egypt, Merel, the king of Egypt, because in his day the Egyptians embittered. That means they called him the bitter one, the tyrant. All the work within the Egyptians made the children of Israel labor they exacted in rigor, in order to afflict the children of Israel. But the more they afflicted them, the more they increased and grew, and the Egyptians grieved because of the children of Israel. Samlah given to Edom. At the time died Hadad, the son of Bedad, the king of Edom, and Samlah from Ephraim, from the country of the children of the east, reigned in his place. And in the 13th year of the reign of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, which was 125th year of the Israelites going down into Egypt, Samlah had reigned over Edom 18 years. Now it's starting to tell you the whole history of the background now. the whole history of the background of these people. What a story, huh? Does it relate to us today? Yeah. There's nothing new under the sun, is there? Nothing new under the sun. Just know one thing, for God is able to cause all things to work for the good of them that are the called according to his purpose. These children of Israel did not diminish in number. And when they left that, we're going to find out later on, Israel robbed Egypt, so to speak. They plundered Egypt. They gave them money to leave. Leave! As I said the other day, one of my friends, Mike, he had a person in one of his rentals, and he was tearing the whole place up, just tearing his house up, and every time he'd go over there, he'd call the police on him. Over to inspect his own property, he called the police on the landowner. He finally went over there and he said, I want you to leave. He said, I'll only leave if you give me $1,500 and just wipe away all of my debt. I'll leave. He's paying him to leave and wiping away all the money that he owes him. And he said, go, go, please go, here's the money. That's what happened in Egypt. They said, here, take all the gold, take all the silver, take all the beautiful clothing, and get out of here and don't come back, please. The average person in Egypt did that. We're going to see why later on. Our Father, we send this message out to honor and glorify you. Your unpreventable progress and eternal purpose, how you watch over your people, and help us in the land that we live in today to open our eyes widely to understand what's going on. Father, please forgive me where I failed you. Use your word to touch lives throughout the world. In Jesus' name I pray.